Thank you to the Wolfeboro Lions Club for underwriting Nutritional Wisdom. The Wolfeboro Lions Club is committed to helping the community with health concerns such as diabetes prevention and preservation of sight and hearing. The Wolfeboro Lions Club meets on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month in the 1812 room at the Wolfeboro Inn. Members of the community are encouraged to attend meetings or visit the website e-clubhouse.org/sites/Wolfeboro for more information.
Hi, this is Patty Walker, registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator, and your host for Nutritional Wisdom. Today, I'd like to discuss how sugar is affecting our health. Many of my clients will report they don't have a sweet tooth or they don't add sugar to their food, so they don't think they have a problem with sugar. Well, I'm here to let you know that sugar is addictive and you don't have to eat sugar in order to have the addiction. So let's get started. But first, I'd like to give a little history on our sugar intake, and we need to think back to World War II times. During the war, the rate of heart disease drastically went down in Europe due to food shortages. After the war, heart disease surged back into the forefront as the #1 killer in many developed countries. This wasn't just happening in Europe, but also throughout the world, including in our country. In 1958, an American researcher named Ansel Keys published a study regarding his research into what causes heart disease. The study was entitled the 7-Country Study, and in it he concluded that countries that ate the most amount of fat, especially animal fat, such as fatty cheeses, fatty meats, sausage, bologna, those types of things, and lard, had the highest rate of heart disease. He concluded eating these types of fat caused heart disease. On the surface, that makes sense. But there were problems with the study. You see, Ansel hypothesized his conclusions and then cherry-picked the data to make his findings appear accurate. He did this by ignoring data from countries that ate a high intake of fat, yet had low rates of heart disease, such as Holland, or the countries that had a low intake of fat, but a high incidence of heart disease, such as Chile. He also ignored other possible culprits that had a role in heart disease, such as sugar. As it turns out, those 7 countries included in the study also ate a large amount of sugar. Mr. Keys was not the only one to ignore the possible link of sugar and heart disease. In 1961, the Harvard School of Public Health conducted research on the effects of sugar and fat on heart disease. In this research, it was found that both of them were linked to an increased rate of heart disease, but the printed conclusions only reported the deleterious effects of fat. Nothing was said about sugar. Why, you might ask? As it turns out, the study was funded by the sugar industry, and they paid Harvard researchers $50,000 each to admit these findings. In today's terms, that's well over $500,000. So you can imagine in 1961 getting paid $50,000. Pretty lucrative, pretty incentive to omit some data. So the potential ills and excess sugar were once again put behind closed doors. Unfortunately, this created an epidemic of health issues that we're still trying to get on top of. In 1977, the first dietary guidelines came out. Heart disease was, and still is, our #1 killer. So much of the committee based their recommendations on the published research on how to reduce heart disease. The focus was on lowering fat from 40% of the calories to 30% of the calories in our diet. A couple problems with this, though. When you remove fat, you remove flavor from the food. And in order to regain the flavor, you need to add either sugar or salt, and often both, to make it taste good. The other thing that the committee did not do was distinguish between the fats, so all fats were vilified. I was going to college studying dietetics at this time, and remember being taught that avocados were bad, and that the only problem with sugar was that it caused dental caries or cavities. Also during this time, high fructose corn syrup came on the market. This sweetener was made from corn, and we had a lot of corn in the 1970s and 80s due to farmer subsidies. It turns out that high fructose corn syrup is cheaper to make than sugar and sweeter, so it began to be put into foods, and our food became sweeter. And because we had a surplus of corn, the extra high fructose corn syrup was available and added to foods that didn't even used to have sugar. So think of condiments such as salad dressings or mayonnaise, tartar sauces, or even your pasta sauces. Also, breads used to only have one sweetener. Today, it's very common to have 3 or 4. So our intake of high fructose corn syrup dramatically increased, and so did our obesity rates. The Pew Research Foundation concluded that our diets today contain about 23% more calories than those in the 1970s. These calories certainly come from larger portions, but also from the hidden calories of sugar in common foods. So let's look at the high fructose corn syrup specifically. If you follow the graph on the screen, you're going to see that our intake of high fructose corn syrup directly parallels our obesity rate. And I'm not saying it's the only reason for our country's weight issue, but it certainly does play a role. So let's fast forward 27 years. In 1990, no state had an obesity rate over 15%. By 2010, 36 of them had an obesity rate over 25%. This was a definite eye-opener and should have been a major red flag. In fact, the World Health Organization recognized that obesity was a worldwide epidemic in more and more countries because they were adopting our American diet. So what they did was they actually recommended that we reduce our added sugar intake to not more than 5% of total calories. This would be 6 teaspoons if you were a woman, which is 24 grams of sugar, or 9 teaspoons of added sugar if you're a man, which is 36 grams of sugar. The American Heart Association also adopted these guidelines. So, sounds good. The problem is that the U.S. government didn't. So, let's see what happened. By 2017, the latest data from the CDC reports 48 states with an obesity rate of over 25%. This is indeed a code blue situation. Code blue, we are dying. In fact, 2 of 3 adults and 1 of every 3 children in our country are either overweight or obese. And part of the issue with this is that we consider normal what we see. And when we see people that are larger than they used to be, we consider that the new norm. But this weight issue is causing health problems. So we need to stop pretending that we don't have a problem and do something about it. My philosophy is to look at the root cause of ailments. And when you do that, you're going to find that sugar is a common denominator. So here, in my opinion, is what's wrong with sugar. We eat too much of it. The average adult in our country eats 22 teaspoons of sugar a day, and the average child 32 teaspoons a day. That amounts to over 152 pounds of sugar annually. Yet I hear all the time, that's not me, I don't add sugar to anything. Well, you don't have to. The food industry is taking care of that. In fact, 75% of all sugar that we consume is from being added into the foods. Some sources such as soda and candy are obvious, but many others, including yogurts, teas, and flavored water, even condiments, go unseen. Did you know that low-fat peanut butter has the same calories as regular peanut butter? They took out the fat, they added sugar. So this gets to another problem with sugar. It's addictive. In the late 80s, a Harvard research study found that it was 8 times more addictive than cocaine. The study was set up to get 43 rats addicted to cocaine. Then, when they demonstrated their addiction, the researchers offered them white sugar. 41 of 43 of these rats consistently chose the sugar. Why? Sugar lights up the pleasure center of your brain, the addictive pleasure center of our brain. It works like this. When we eat sugar, and also sweetened beverages, cereals, breads, desserts, snack foods, any source of carbohydrate like that will turn to glucose in our blood. Glucose is our blood sugar, and it will travel through the body, and when it gets to the brain, it lights up the pleasure center by releasing serotonin and dopamine. These are the same chemicals released with most addictive substances. The larger the dose, the better the high. So if it's sugar or refined carbohydrates such as white flour, it turns very, very quickly into glucose, which is blood sugar. You get a surge and it lights up the pleasure center. But like other addictive substances, the high is not permanent. The reason is when your blood glucose levels rise, your body also secretes insulin. Insulin is the hormone that helps the sugar get out of the bloodstream and into your cells for energy and storage. So you eat something sweet, your brain says, yum, feeling good. Then insulin has to go and spoil the party. Sugar levels in your brain lower, and your brain craves that high. The food manufacturers exploit this by utilizing the bliss factor. It is the perfect trifecta of sugar, salt, and fat to get the good response from the brain. In fact, some manufacturers, when they're designing foods, they actually have volunteers with electrodes around their head so that they can measure the brain activity to make sure that the pleasure center is lit up and they have the right ratios. So we're fighting a hard battle here. So a good example of how sugar affects our choices was played out in a recent commercial of two babies having pasta. One was ragu and the other was Prego. The mothers were feeding the babies their supper. The Prego-fed baby gleefully ate all of his pasta and even put the bowl on top of his head, perhaps hoping through osmosis that the sauce would go directly to the brain. The ragu baby sat there and refused all attempts to eat his pasta. Well, I did some label research and found out that ragu does not add sugar to their sauce, but that Prego had added 2 grams of added sugar. This amounts to just a half a teaspoon, but it certainly made a huge difference to the preference of the sauces by these innocent taste testers. I also do want to point out some solid research by Susan Pierce Thompson. She has a PhD and is an expert on addiction. Her philosophy is that we each have a tendency towards addiction, and that our brains, 1/3 of us are highly addictive, 1/3 of us have a moderately addictive brain, and 1/3 of us has a brain that isn't really responsive to addictive substances. So how do you know if you have an addictive brain? One way is if you are tempted by the sight, the smell, even the word. You're hearing coworkers talk about going out for pizza, and all you can think about is going out for pizza. Most likely you have a highly addictive brain. I like to use a bowl of chocolate as an example. So if there's a bowl of Hershey Kisses on the table and you walk by, you can't stop. You can't help yourself. You have to grab some, and perhaps more than some. A person with a moderately addictive brain would also recognize the Hershey Kisses and enjoy the smell and maybe have a few. Or maybe not, but generally they would be influenced by the smell and the sight of the chocolate. The person with the low addictive brain, they A, may not even notice the chocolate, or B, say, yeah, is there a piece of fruit around? So what I really want you to understand is that while not everyone is addicted to sugar, most of us are. At least 2/3 of us are addicted. But what does affect all of us is sugar's effect on our gut. A diet high in sugar and processed carbohydrates has negative effects on our health by feeding the wrong types of bacteria in our large intestines. Our colon, or large intestines, has over 100 trillion bacteria that do many important things. This includes providing energy to our intestinal lining and keeping it healthy and sealed, converting key nutrients, as well as working with our immune system to keep us healthy. We need a healthy gut microbiome, and the researchers suggest about 75 to 80% of the bacteria be the friendly kind. Those are the ones such as the bifidobacterium or the lactobacillus. You can get these through yogurt. Yogurts made with live cultures, they generally have lactobacillus in them. Other foods such as fermented foods, your kombucha, your kefir, your sauerkraut, naturally have these bacteria. And you can also get them from probiotic supplements, where the majority of strains are going to come from these two. You also need a diet high in fiber, because fiber is the food source that keeps these healthy bacteria alive, allowing them to do their magic. Now, we also all have some not good bacteria, such as E. coli and H. pylori, Candida, a fungus, but we all have some of it. As long as the healthy ratio is good, we're going to be okay. The reason is that the unhealthy bacteria feed on sugar, white flour, and processed carbohydrates. If you have a diet high in these foods, you're going to encourage potential overgrowth of bad bacteria, which can weaken your intestinal lining, set you up for gastrointestinal issues, increase your risk of nutritional deficiencies, and increase your risk of inflammation and many chronic diseases. Besides obesity, excess sugar consumption is now associated with heart disease, diabetes, prediabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, as well as brain conditions such as Alzheimer's and even depression. The brain and gut have a direct communication through the vagus nerve, and an unhealthy diet is going to lower the serotonin production in your gut. But also, if you have a lot of bad bacteria, it's going to promote sugar cravings. You may have heard me say sugar is everywhere, and the fact is, it is impossible to avoid. Also, foods that contain enriched flour does the same thing in the body as sugar. So here are some examples of just how much sugar is in our food. Let's start with the beverages. So Red Bull may be obvious. It has caffeine, it has sugar, 27 grams. That's almost 7 teaspoons. But don't ignore those sports drinks and flavored bottled waters. These are not always better choices. Did you know that sports drinks may be popular, but they're intended for a very sweaty athletic event that lasts for over an hour, or for persons who perspire heavily during their jobs, such as construction workers, to replace electrolytes with a little bit of sugar? If that doesn't sound like you, then I suggest you stick with plain water for hydration and skip the added calories from these sugared drinks. What many of us don't know is that just 4 ounces of a sweetened beverage can raise your blood sugar 45 to 60 points in 15 minutes. Persons with diabetes know this because when they have a low blood sugar, they often treat it with orange juice. Orange juice can raise that blood sugar very quickly. So that means that fruit juice isn't always the best choice either. So it's going to do that orange juice, even if it's 100% juice, it's going to do the same thing as drinking a 12-ounce can of Coke. This is going to spike your blood sugar up to 120 points in some people. It's just best to get your nutrition from fresh fruit. You can also get the bonus of fiber from that too. And don't think that yogurts are much better. Plain yogurts will of course always have natural sugars that's found in the milk. Usually 10 to 12 grams in a cup. Did you know that some fruited yogurts contain 4 times the sugar of the plain? In this example, there's 8 extra teaspoons of sugar added to the yogurt. So just think about that. Would you get a cup of yogurt and literally add 8 teaspoons of sugar on top of that? Most of us would find that absurd, yet the food companies are doing this. In this case, it would be best to stick to plain yogurt, add your own berries, throw in some flaxseed, chia seeds, hemp seeds, to make it a really good nutritional powerhouse. This is not only going to give you fiber, but some great nutrients like vitamin C and omega-3 fatty acids. And remember, if the snack product is baked or reduced, it most likely has added sugar. In this case, a half a teaspoon per serving. The bottom line is that it's really, really tough to cut out sugar entirely. But honestly, you don't have to. Just start being mindful of your intake. So start by reading the nutrition facts section of the food labels and see what your current starting point is. Maybe it's 50 grams of sugar. Maybe it's only 30. Maybe it's 100. But wherever it is, my suggestion is to gradually work down from there with the eventual goal of keeping it around 25 grams per day. Or less. Less is better. The new label should make this a bit easier. The picture on the screen has 2 labels. Sugar is listed under the total carbohydrates section in the middle of both labels. The label on the left only lists total grams of sugar, and we're left guessing how much is natural versus how much is added. The label on the right identifies 2 of the 12 grams as natural and 10 is added. When we're talking about limiting your sugar, we're talking about the added sugar amounts. So examples are a can of tomatoes. They're going to have 3 grams of sugar on it, but that's naturally in the tomatoes. That's not added. Unlike the fruit juices and the fruited yogurt where it definitely has added. So you want to look for, under sugar, you want to look for the added sugar because the added sugar is what we are trying to reduce, okay? So in this example with 10 grams of sugar, if you're following the American Heart Association or the World Health Organization guidelines, you're a third to halfway to your daily total, to your daily goal with just 1 serving. And if you eat 2 servings, you could be done for the day. Now, what's interesting is the USDA promotes 10% of total calories from added sugar. This is disappointing because anything over 7% increases your risk for chronic diseases. And the way to know that it's 10% is you have to look at the percentage of total daily values, and that's all the way to the right. And it says in this example 20%. So there are 10 grams of sugar and there's 4 calories per gram. So that's 40 calories from the added sugar. So this does add up to 20% of a 2,000 calorie diet. So I'd mentioned before that those percentage daily values are based on 2,000 calories. They can't be applied to most of us because not everyone needs that 2,000 calories. So they're a good litmus test, but again, I wouldn't use them as the be-all, end-all to see if you're meeting your needs. So in order to reduce your risk of chronic diseases, I would really encourage you to stay with the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization guidelines of 5%. So in that case, it's too much, okay? So if you're interested in further action steps on how to reduce sugar in your diet, I invite you to text the word sugar, so SUGAR, to 986-203-6255. You're going to be able to sign up for my mailing list and also receive a free handout on easy ways to reduce sugar today. So that number, again, you just have to, in the text bar on your phone, text the word sugar to 986-203-6255. So now that I've reviewed how and why sugar can be a problem, I'd like to take a few simple steps that you can do today to reduce your sugar intake. First, eliminate sweetened beverages. This is the #1 source of added sugar in our diet, so it's a great place to start. This includes fruit juices, sports drinks, and some flavored water, so you're really going to have to look at the label for that. Second, eliminate enriched floured products. Again, look at the ingredient list on the label, and if it says enriched flour, first, second, third, I don't care where it comes in the ingredient list, if it says enriched flour, consider putting it back. Enriched flour sounds really healthy, but in reality, it has all the fiber and most of the micronutrients removed. It also breaks down really quickly, which means it will flood your brain with sugar at a high amount, so you want to avoid that. Read the nutrition facts section of the label and pay attention to the added sugar line. Best to keep it under 25 grams per day if possible. Avoid those artificial sweeteners too. Those blue, pink, and yellow packets still can stimulate sugar cravings. Stevia and monk fruit are actually good alternatives. They're natural sweeteners. And lastly, consider taking a sugar detox program. You can search online for one offered in your area. It's time for me to share a simple recipe with you. So because we're talking about sugar, I thought I'd give you a healthy dessert that does not contain sugar but does contain dates. So today's recipe is a no-cook chocolate pudding. You should see all the ingredients to the left. You can substitute light coconut milk if you desire, but please don't use coconut milk from the carton because the pudding's just going to be too thin. The texture of the pudding, you want the creaminess, so Full fat will give you the best creaminess. If you're worried about the calories, then go with the light canned coconut milk, but not from the carton. In this one, I just used Hershey's unsweetened cocoa powder, and as the instructions say, you place all the ingredients into a blender and mix for 45 to 60 seconds until on high until smooth. You pour them into serving dishes. It does create 6 servings, and refrigerate for about 6 hours, and then feel free to garnish with some shredded coconut, some berries, some chopped nuts, as desired. Well, that's today's show. Thank you so much for watching, and wishing you good health.